Call the meeting to order. Stand for the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Ms. Doherty?
Here.
Mr. Hoey?
Here.
Mayor Leahy?
Here.
Ms. Martin? Ms. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Dakota?
Here.
Mr. Dillon?
Here.
7 present.
Thank you. Special order of business, communication, remote participation. One quick question, Mr. Hall. Oh, can you do that? Yeah. Communication, remote participation, members of the public may view the meeting via LTC, and those wishing to speak regarding specific agenda items shall register to speak in advance of the meeting by sending an email to the superintendent's office. The Zoom link will be going out momentarily too for anybody at home that is watching this and wants to watch it on Zoom. 4 minutes. Need a motion to approve both the special and the regular meeting minutes of the Lowell School Committee, October 21st, 2020, and to place them on file. Need a motion by Mr. Dillon, seconded by Mr. Dakota. All those in favor, say aye. Permission to enter, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you. Permissions to enter are listed within your packet. The recommendation is approval as written.
Any questions? Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, I have one quick question, but I'll move to approve first. Move to approve.
Okay, motion by Mr. Hoey, second by Mr. Dakota. Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, just a quick question, actually, through you to the superintendent. Could you find out and get me a number of how many deaf people and how many blind people we have in our system? Is that possible?
Sure. Mr. Holy, we can do that. Ms. Desmond, can you take that note?
Thank you.
Roll call?
Yes.
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 Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark? Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Next, we have memorials. We have memorial for Mr. William Ken Clark, husband of retired Bailey School teacher Dorothy Clark, father of retired aide school coordinator Patricia Clark, father of retired Lowell High Fine Arts Department chair Dr. Sharon Clark, father of Sullivan School special education teacher Mr. James Clark, father-in-law of Wang School teacher Catherine Clark, grandfather of Shaughnessy School special education teacher Cassandra Clark, and uncle of Bailey School teacher Mary Ellen McNamara. We'll have a moment of silence. We extend our deepest sympathy to the Clark family. Thank you. I just wanted to say that I've known the Clarks for many years, since our days in Seabrook Beach in the early 70s, so I'm dating myself. But great family, great tradition of school teachers, as you can see. And Mr. Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to chime in on that, again, pointing out how so many children follow in their parents' footsteps, following, doing the family business, as it were. I thought there'd been a lot of Dakotas teaching in this Lowell public school system, but I think the Clarks have really eclipsed us in that number. But a great guy, a very nice man, and a terrific family. I worked alongside of his wife, Dottie Clark, a great teacher, and absolutely loved by all of her students. And Sharon was the department chair while I was at the high school. So again, very, very sad that he's gone, but great family. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have subcommittees. Subcommittee report. School committee person, Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The School Improvement and Performance Management Subcommittee did meet last week on Thursday, October 29th. Attending from the subcommittee were myself, Mr. Dakota, and Mr. Dillon. We also had other members of the committee there, Ms. Clark, Ms. Doherty, and Mr. Hoey. And presenting from the administration were Dr. Guillory and Ms. Desmond. We were discussing the process of determining the key performance indicators that the district is going to be using to judge and grade our progress against some standard goals for this school year. We discussed, I think, a number of different topics and areas that we want to be able to track on a very regular basis. Information, and the administration I know is working on this, coming to us in a easily communicated format, so that certainly for the committee it will be extremely helpful. Far more important, it will be understandable for our community to be able to track progress over time of the district as a whole, and also in many cases each school community. So we are looking forward to getting we'll be looking at getting our first kind of round of these measures at the end of the first quarter, I believe that's correct. So we've got a little time, but the administration did assure us that we'll get some sample information so that we can see how the information is going to be communicated to us, so that if we have any questions or concerns, we'd be able to fine-tune that instrument. Just to give people, an idea of what we'll be tracking. Some of these are what you certainly would expect. Looking at attendance, both for staffing and for students, looking at some of the discipline actions that are happening, tracking diversity hiring, standards against social emotional learning, and, some of the real just like sheer numbers of meal distribution, so we're able to track those points. Myself, I am particularly interested in seeing how we'll be able to track the on track to graduation metric, being able to see how many of our high school students are moving forward appropriately, so that, again, this being an issue where if you can find out early enough, interventions can happen that hopefully can get students back on track. Also tracking course grades, as well as some of the proficiency data based on nationally normed, standardized assessments that we use both for ELA as well as our math programming. I know that we did go back and forth and kind of talking about how we think it would best be presented, so I'm looking forward to see what the sample will look like. And again, what we're hoping is that this will be kind of a compact dashboard that will allow us to track these things in a very clear and easy to kind of see movement within the different metrics over the course of the year. I would defer to my colleagues if anyone would like to add anything or if they have any suggestions that they want to make moving forward.
Any questions? Ms. Doherty?
Excuse me. I'm not actually on the subcommittee, but as Ms. Martin mentioned, I did attend. I think it's so important as we go forward that we do align our strategic goals with measurements as we go forward. And we discussed at the meeting that so much of it is in the details. What are we choosing to track? How can we measure it? And how is that information going to be useful to us? So I think that I'm very much in favor of moving forward with this. I just wanted to express to the whole committee some of the areas that I'm thinking would make it a more useful tool for us, is that if we look at under the, one of the strategic goals for the district, which I would say is probably a standard strategic goal for many, if not all, school districts, is that we measure that we are improving teaching and learning, that we're moving our students in a positive direction to teaching and learning. And I know at the subcommittee meeting, I mentioned the idea of doing more around standard assessments and tracking how we do with that. Well, you'll see as we get later on in the agenda, the Mass Association of School Committees is asking DESE that we don't even take MCAS for the next couple of years because of the impact of the pandemic. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think it is one way to measure. But in terms of our metrics and what we're looking at, so if we don't go with something like that, I would be interested, and it could be under teaching and learning, it could be under operations efficiency. For instance, one of the metrics we were going to look at for operations efficiency was the amount of PPE equipment that we have. I think that was, I don't have the document right in front of me, and I can't pull it up on my pad or whatever it's called. But that was one that, okay, so we're just going to keep track of how much hand sanitizer and masks we have in. Yeah, that is one way to measure operation efficiency. I don't know if it's as helpful as one area that I did mention to the superintendent, I think on one of our one-on-one meetings, that's been of concern for me, and I think it speaks to equity too, in terms of class sizes and how we are managing that now that we are fully remote, that some of our teachers who were remote from the beginning had huge class sizes, where our in-person teachers were limited because of the 6 feet distancing and all that. And I'm not saying we can really maybe spread that out, because when we hopefully go back to in-person, we're going to have those kids back in school. But even looking at the number of students in the remote classes, I'm hearing there's some serious discrepancy. For instance, I had a parent tell me that there were over 28 people in her child's kindergarten class. Then I've heard of other kindergarten classes, these are all remote, that have 10. So, and then I know of first grade teachers that are having over 22 and 24, and we don't have paras for them. So the long story short of this, if we were going to put it under operations efficiency, or even if you wanted to put it under our goal to improve teaching and learning, but some kind of metric that speaks to our efforts to provide, because I don't think it's helping the teachers or the students. I mean, can you imagine teaching over 28 kindergartners on Zoom? I don't see how it would be even possible. So I'm looking for some movement to show that we are doing these, what I would consider operation efficiency, to balance out those classes. And maybe that's not something we can do right now. And I did mention this one to Dr. Boyd, I did know of a substantially separate classroom with severe needs, students of mixed needs, that was over 22 or around 22. That has been resolved. But that's only one that I heard of that was resolved. I think there are other ones out there that we should be looking at in terms of this whole idea of operations efficiency or under school improvement. And I know we're going to be getting a draft from you guys. I just wanted to express it up front to see if we could have something, incorporate these concerns in a meaningful document that we can use going forward.
So just for clarification, do you want to put that in a form of a motion?
Okay, so I
get
guess my
accurate
motion would be
numbers?
to add, under the key performance indicators document that you're putting together for us, to add something about some equity in class sizes. And if it has to be, and I understand that, we have to have the remote group and then the in-person, because we do hope to be in-person again soon.
Right.
But even with the remote, so I'm looking for equity in class size
Okay.
across the
So
district
motion by Ms.
as something we measure.
Sure. Motion by Ms. Doherty, second by Ms. Martin. And just for one other clarification, because I figure we should just act on what we're saying. So when you heard that there was a large number class, and you said, we know we can't change it now, we should change it right now, right? So,
Well, I know the special education class was changed,
okay, all right,
so,
all right. I just want to make sure if we're going to bring something up like that, we should be changing it
Right.
as soon as possible. So, Mr. Dakota?
To go along with the class size issue, I think that there's still wide discrepancies on screen time that remote kids are spending within different classes, different schools, and that, to me, just is not tolerable. We cannot let that happen. There's got to be total equity. That means everyone is getting the same amount of time, screen time, the same amount of breaks. And one parent said that that their child didn't get lunch, a break for lunch. That's not acceptable. I mean, we need to make sure that either the directives that the principals are giving their staff for the remote teaching, that it's very clear of what their schedule is supposed to be and where breaks should be happening. I mean, that is just unacceptable in my book. Sorry.
We'll take
Thank
a
you.
look at that. Ms. Clark?
Thank you. At a meeting a few months ago, within this time that we've returned to school, I made mention of smaller class sizes in person for the teachers who are teaching in person, and I was quickly corrected by a number of teachers who reached out and said that was a misunderstanding of mine, because oftentimes the teachers who are teaching in person were managing 2 separate classrooms, so they might have 12 students
Right,
in a
24.
classroom, but they're managing a second classroom of 12, with the help of a paraprofessional. So while I think it would be interesting to hear and understand what class sizes we have, I don't necessarily agree that this would be under a KPI, because I think these key performance indicators are very much tied to our strategic plan, and I think they're important, but I'm not clear what, I think, again, class size is important, but what are we looking to do with that information? And the KPIs are something we're looking to track and see progress in, so I'm not sure what exactly we'd be looking to make changes to, especially when we've also identified that students are, one of the important pieces is that a student is with a teacher, is building that relationship with a teacher, and we're not necessarily looking to move students around unnecessarily during this school year. So it's a question back to my colleagues.
All right, Mr. Dakota, sure.
If you have a remote class of 14 kids, where the teacher can really focus on those 14 kids, you double that number, those kids are not going to get the same attention that the 14-size class. So there's that equity issue. So we have to offer the same thing to everybody.
Sure. Mr. Dillon, then Ms. Jordan. Mr. Dillon first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with pretty much everybody what you're saying. We do have to keep in mind that these are uncertain times, and that is certainly the reason for these discrepancies in the numbers and the kids who are now. I mean, it varies school to school on how we were able to staff the schools and what our staffing to kid ratios were. So I think we just need to keep that in mind. Yeah, I know that there are all these inequities. There are inequities everywhere, and I mean, remote learning itself is not a very equitable practice. So we know that we need to improve in those areas, but we need to keep in mind at least just the logistics of it, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you. Sure, Ms. Doherty.
Thank you, and I appreciate having the opportunity to respond to Ms. Clark's questions. I agree, key performance indicators are information to help us move forward. That's the whole idea of a key performance indicator. I specifically mentioned the operation efficiency goal. I think that, again, all we're talking about is tied to our strategic goals, and many of our strategic goals are what you would find in any, not only school district, but organization. Operation efficiency is a good goal for any organization to have. But under operation efficiency, we were going to track our PPEs. How much protective equipment we have. I don't find that particularly that useful, but I'm not against getting that information to know that we have the supplies we need. However, if we know, and I don't know of all of them, I only know of a case of over 28 kindergartners and a class of 10 kindergartners. We know those children and that staff person are working in completely different environments. If you're trying to teach 28 remote learners versus 10, there's an inequity there that we need. If you're going to look at operation efficiency, I would say it's a very important indicator. And not that we're going to get them all fixed. We are working under, as Mr. Dillon said, extremely difficult, challenging times, like none in our lifetime or our parents' lifetime. It's just crazy. But we still should do our best to provide consistency, as Mr. Dakota says, consistency in expectations of screen time, of breaks time, and especially anybody who's taught knows consistency in the size. Not that every class is going to be this hard number, but 28 versus 10 kindergartners. So I think that is a metric that is not only important for us to track so that we can move forward in being more efficient and being more equity, but it completely aligns with our goals.
Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My only recommendation would be is I do think that this information is incredibly important for us to have, recognizing that it's two different worlds. What's happening in classrooms is necessarily going to be very different than what's happening with the remote learning. But I do think that it's not so much an ongoing KPI. I think it's what we need right now is a report telling us exactly what class sizes are across the district. It's something we've received in the past. It shouldn't be difficult for us to get that. Just a listing across the board for each school, each classroom, and what the numbers are in those classrooms. I think that would allow us to ensure that like classrooms have like numbers. And then we could, see if there are inequities that we can address. I think it will be challenging, but I do think that it's one of those things we need to count, even if in this, extreme circumstance, we may not necessarily be able to fix it. We still have to hold ourselves accountable for recognizing it as an inequity that we need to be aware of and trying to resolve.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I give the information that's being requested by the committee?
Sure.
Sure. So the memorandum of agreement we have with the UTL stipulates elementary class size for in-persons based on 6 feet of social distancing and a square footage of the classroom. That varies across the district based on the class spaces. As Ms. Clark pointed out, there are also classroom sizes that utilize 2 classroom spaces as 1 classroom, which would then lead to maybe a more normal or traditional or typical class size approximation. The class size within the MOA is stipulated for remote at 30 to 35 to offset that difference of in-person, 30 elementary, 35. That's the agreement we have with UTL. In every instance, we're abiding by that agreement. So the differences that you're seeing are students who shifted to remote who were in person. If we were to level when we're in a temporary remote environment, we would negate our ability to remove back to a in-person environment without, again, offsetting or disrupting those teacher-student relationships. So the example might be this: if Mr. Dakota is in Ms. Phillips' classroom for in-person, Ms. Phillips goes remote, and now to level the classes, we also add Ms. Doherty, Jackie, to Ms. Phillips' classroom. As soon as we move Mr. Dakota back or Andy back to in-person, now Ms. Doherty has to change teachers. So within a matter of 3 weeks, we could upset one student 3 times over by changing their classroom. So to avoid that, to continue to maintain continuity for our students, we kept our same class size arrangements, same student-teacher relationships as we shifted, because this is a temporary arrangement, not a permanent arrangement. The class sizes are stipulated within the MOA. There are variations across, but in all cases, we do abide by the MOA.
Sure, Ms. Doherty?
I just want to clarify, my understanding was that those numbers I gave you were both remote classes, that there is a kindergarten remote class that's over 28 or in the high like that, and then there's one that's 10. So my concern is that I understand what you're saying, and that's what makes it so difficult. The in-person, we don't want to separate kids from their in-person teacher. They stay with their in-person teacher. But for the kids who have always been remote, we should have some kind of consistency or class size, not those kind of variations that we're seeing.
I can research that. I believe it's the situation that I described, but I can research if there's some kind of anomaly.
Thank you.
All right, all those in favor of the motion? All right, and then you're all set on your report?
I'd submit that as a report of progress.
Okay, so motion to accept as a report of progress by Ms. Martin, seconded by Mr. Dillon. Let's see, now we're into reports of superintendent. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, committee. I'm happy to share with you our first report, which is not the first that you've heard of this conversation. Matter of fact, our entire strategic plan that we were just talking about in terms of our key performance indicators are centered on our conversation of equity and our fundamental commitments to equity. This committee has taken a bold stance by taking a step further than most within its planning process to define equity in terms of what it means for our children and our families. This committee has taken the added step of adopting a formal motion identifying racism as a national health crisis. Here with us today, we have Abraham Osorio. Many of you had a chance to meet Abraham previously. He's our climate specialist. We've often also had a conversation of what does climate mean within an environment where we're stressing equity and elevating the voice of our children. So I think it's going to be an opportunity to also engage Mr. Osorio, who's been an extraordinary asset to our district, working alongside and under the leadership of Ms. Phillips within our newly formed, as of last year, Office of Equity, the first time in the history of Lowell Public Schools that we've had an Office of Equity. Here, as you'll see with the intro video, we work through this protocol with our students. We also have, and thank you to Mr. Osorio's leadership, a district advisory council of students who now, starting last week, are fully formed and advise me on district level decision making. Our students brought forward the request that has led to this first step to bring about an anti-racism and racism reporting protocol. I also want to thank and take the opportunity to recognize School Committee Member Clark, who's taken the committee's liaison role in helping us to formulate our district level and district-wide anti-racism, social justice, equity training across the district. And Ms. Clark has now participated in 2, which has included conversations with other similarly situated school districts across the state, as well as yesterday's training that happened across the district. And I believe Ms. Doherty also participated in that training. The training was attended by, I want to say, Mr. Osorio was at 1,500 people across the district over 3 sessions. I attended the last session, and the reviews that we've received so far have been overwhelmingly positive. The principal over at the Stocklosa Middle School, Mr. Cardesi, was kind enough to share his staff's response and survey, overwhelmingly positive to what, as all of you know, is sometimes a hardship to participate in training via Zoom. So this facilitator was able to remain engaging across the Zoom platform, which was an added benefit, I will tell you, to the content that was also shared. So we're going to share with you here. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Ms. Phillips, and then I'll hopefully be able to summarize a bit. You should expect to see this type of presentation over time across the year as we share out with you how we're delivering on the equity agenda that was adopted by the school committee with our 1+4 year strategic plan. Ms. Phillips?
So, Mr. Mayor, school committee members, I'd like to start with a video, and then I will introduce the presentation which Mr. Osorio will take us through.
Hi, I'm Joel Boyd, Superintendent of Lowell Public Schools, and I wanted to share an important message with you about changes happening within our school district. Last year, our district took a significant step in our strategic planning process by defining our fundamental commitments to equity as being central to every aspect of our work. However, we all know that words without actions are meaningless. Our students have expressed concerns surrounding the lack of consistency with how our institution is addressing racism, discrimination, and harassment. As public school leaders, we must be accountable for examining not only the individual instances and implications of racism, but also the embedded institutional racism that has directly or indirectly perpetuated racism and privilege across some policies and practices. As one small step toward combating inequitable practices in our district, we have designed a new protocol for reporting bias-based misconduct within our schools, which will enable us to learn, grow, and eradicate discrimination and racism. You can find this reporting mechanism by going to the district homepage and clicking on Our District. And then scroll down to Discrimination, Harassment, and Racism. On the left-hand side is where you will find the reporting form. You can feel free to fill out this form if you are a student, parent, or staff person, and someone is assigned at each school to follow up on every instance that is reported. You can also report a bias-based incident to any school or central office employee, and they can report the matter on your behalf. Over the next few weeks, we will work to build awareness around the new reporting protocol for staff, students, and families, which will include a series of anti-racism training sessions that staff and administrators will engage in. We recognize that there is much work to do to ensure that every student enrolled, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, has equitable access to a quality education that will help them achieve their greatest potential. We embrace our responsibility and obligation to our students and to the broader LPS community to create and sustain an environment where students feel safe, respected, and inspired.
So I want to acknowledge Jeffrey Pickett. He's our community engagement strategist, and he's really helped us to do a better job of getting our communication out. Racism, discrimination, bullying, harassment, that goes against everything that Lowell Public Schools stands for and believes in. And so as a proactive step toward ensuring a safe and welcoming, respectful, inclusive, working and learning environment, we have taken the step to put this reporting protocol into place. And this is for discrimination, harassment, and racism. It does mirror our bullying protocol, but we really did want to specifically call out racism and discrimination because we do have a commitment toward a welcoming, fair environment, and this was a proactive step we wanted to take. Mr. Osorio will take us through the process, and as Superintendent Boyd mentioned, this is a recommendation that came out of sessions with students. We did meet with our Strategic Advisory Committee yesterday, and they also were very affirming of this process and gave us some great feedback on how to roll this out community-wide, because again, it's not just for staff, but the success of this will rely on students, families, staff, all working together, understanding the process, and then learning and growing from this process. The process will ensure that all perceived violations and complaints of racial discrimination or harassment they're acknowledged, they are considered and dealt with in a manner that's fair and consistent. We want people who report issues or grievances to know that they will be addressed and taken seriously, and we want to make sure that we're ensuring a safe environment for people to come forward with matters that they feel we need to address. So I will let Mr. Abraham Osorio take it from here.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for having me. Appreciate it. How do you work this thing? Sorry, I'm not tech savvy. No, it's okay. All right, beautiful. Thank you. Thanks again for having me. So we will quickly delineate the logistics and details of this new protocol we have for reporting bias-based grievances. So how did we get here? In the spring, we launched a virtual student listening campaign to assess the student experience at the high school and to give them the opportunity to express their concerns that they have with the inequities that they claim were taking place at the high school. And it also gave us the opportunity to collect data regarding these experiences to inform next steps and action steps. We also assessed school climate practices and discipline data to see if it aligned with what the young people had to say about their grievances. And last but not least, we engaged in dialogue with district working groups and also task force regarding culturally responsive practices to see what we can employ, what practices we can employ to combat these grievances. The findings of that assessment were: one, students reported feeling that some staff and school administrators are not handling these grievances with earnest, and they disregarded most of them in their experience. There was no clear reporting protocol for racism and discrimination, and students also felt that the response to administration and grievances lacked equity and fidelity. Also the significant disparities that the students witnessed amongst students of color and white students, their white counterpart, as it pertained to disciplinary actions, were overwhelming. And last but not least, students reported needing a more structured and sustainable outlet for students to be heard and advocate for student rights and student voice. So the action steps were one of many, but the main one we'll discuss here today with this new protocol for reporting discrimination, harassment, and racism. Again, like Ms. Phillips reported, it reflected the bullying protocol, but we want to differentiate the two because, as we know, discrimination, harassment, and racism is much more severe than bullying. And we also want to create a whole different protocol because historically we use the bullying protocol to report all types of grievances, and we want to differentiate them. And we also employed a culture responsive anti-racism training to supplement the protocol, which we administered yesterday. It was extremely fruitful and productive, so thank you to those that engaged yesterday. Outlining the components of the protocol, we mandated that the protocol must be robust and equitable, and it takes into account all offense scenarios and all role players, including staff, not just students, but staff. It delineates the flow chart, highlighting the designees and co-designees for who will be handling the investigation process and the determination process. And last but not least, it consists of an accountability measure to eliminate bias, discretion, and process happening in silo on an individual part. The biggest and overarching complaint from students was that the staff and administration were handling these grievances with discretion, and they were not handling them with earnest. The required components to the reporting protocol, which is the process for investigation. If any staff were to receive a report from a student verbally, they are mandated to using the reporting protocol and a reporting system to report the incident as mandated reporters. Students and families are also encouraged to use a protocol and use a reporting system. And staff and mandated reporters and investigators will follow up with the investigation process. And before we go further with the investigation process, designees and investigators must ensure safety of all students to ensure that nothing else is taking place before we move forward with the investigation process. Obligations to notify, we must obviously notify parents and guardians, also other districts if it involves other students from other districts, and last but not least, other law enforcement if in the event we deem it necessary. So investing conducted by leader, school designees, and determination must also be remedial and also delineate on what responsive actions, disciplinary actions are necessary. And more importantly, all of our accountability measures must be grounded in restorative justice practices to ensure that the reflection process is there for students to benefit from the experience and identify the silver lining. So next steps, as we noted already, yesterday was the first of many trainings for anti-racism that most of the district engaged in yesterday, and again, it was extremely productive. Students are to be made aware of this new protocol and process by the ways of advisory and seminar groups. It's up to the discretion of the school administration. Forms and links must be accessible to all students throughout the building. And family also must be made aware of this new policy and protocol by all forms of communication via, phone calls, verbal communication, and also written communication, and other forms of communication that are left out. And last but not least, each school were encouraged to assemble a school and climate team to kind of address all the inequities that linger in the school, to continue to address it and make sure that all of our practices are equitable and sustainable. and I will leave it to Ms. Phillips.
Sure, and Mr. Osorio, can you go to the next step slide, please? So as he mentioned, we did have an initial session yesterday for all staff district-wide. We wanted to, we acknowledge that there's been work happening over years in different pockets. So for some staff, it was new learning. For other staff, it was building on what they already knew or a refresher. But we wanted to make sure that there's a common understanding, some foundational understanding of racism, of anti-racism across our school district, because we know that we could not roll out a protocol like this without opening up discussion on what we're trying to address. We do have a few submissions that have been made already using the form, and it's really provided an opportunity for us to discuss what happened, how we're reviewing different incidents. I think this is going to help us grow as an institution. But a big issue was that we didn't have a formal process for gathering this information as relates to racism. And so students shared, well, I told my teacher, or I told my principal, or I told a friend, but we didn't always have, a record of this so that we could address how do we strengthen and grow our own knowledge, but also improve our institutions. So it's already something that's been well received by the students who have been made aware of this, the advisory. We've been talking with the high school around how do we share this information out across the high school. In our strategic advisory committee yesterday, that's the group that helped to advise us on our strategic plan. There was discussion about the need for not only sharing with parents that this exists, but we also need to talk with parents around what is racism, right? Because we know that a lot of children form their thinking from what happens at home, or what they're experiencing through media or social media. So that was one of the big takeaways from the advisory yesterday, was that we can't just have the protocol and tell people it's out there. We have to have learning opportunities for students, families, alongside staff. So this really is a multi-year process. School committee member Clark does sit on our district Cultural Responsive Leadership Academy team, which is through DESE. We received a DESE grant to do multi-year planning. So we're excited about this. We're excited about what this means for our institution, and our hope is to make good on our commitment toward ensuring that all of our students have a fair and welcoming, culturally responsive environment to help them fulfill their greatest potential.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. And I think it's important to recognize here, this is one technical step. This is a small step, but it's in response to what we're hearing from our students, and it's making sure that this is couched or contextualized within a bigger picture of organizational learning. We're going to be sharing out with you many steps that we're taking as an organization. The next presentation you'll hear is from Ms. Phillips around her an initiative she's leading around diversifying teacher leaders throughout the district. You heard from us share previously that last year we were in charting the diversity hiring initiative. 63% of the central office hires that we made last year were people who identified as being of color. These are important steps for us to take as an organization within the second most diverse school district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What I think is also even more important is just our demonstration of being open to input from our young people, being aware of the experiences that they're sharing, and making sure that we're elevating their voice within the process so that Lowell Public Schools is truly a school district that's operating on behalf of the young people who are here today. And I want to recognize someone that perhaps people might be surprised for me to recognize, but Mr. Hoey, since I've gotten here, many times has picked up the phone to call me and ask a number of questions about equity. Just last week, he called me and asked, could I share a little bit on City Life, the show that he co-hosts on many occasions, of the difference between equity and equality. Many conversations that he and I have had just demonstrating an awareness and an openness to learn. I hope you've grown through those conversations. I've certainly grown through those conversations. And I think one that I've talked to a number of people about is just this conversation of white privilege. Now, I can tell you, as a poor Jewish kid growing up in Dover, Delaware, I did not identify as being someone of privilege in any way. Yet that's growth and awareness over time that comes through this type of learning opportunity that we're sharing out across the district. I think I would be remiss, Mr. Mayor, if I didn't share our young people's positive response to your advocacy at the city level, and also the continued invitation for our city partners to take part in this continued growth endeavor. I think our school district is a microcosm of the city as a whole, and together as a city school district partnership, can we deliver on the promise that we make to our young people of truly being an environment that is representative of them and embracing of everything that they bring to the table by virtue of the great diversity within this city. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, school committee. With that, I'll yield the floor to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm all for, I think this is a great report. Thank you very much for this work, but I'm all for listening, hearing, and listening to our students, but in here, I didn't really see where you were including teachers, staff, and administrators who would be the ones dealing with these issues from the beginning of this. Or did they just hear about it when you had that meeting with them? Were they involved from the start of that?
No, Ms. Phillips.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. So it did come from our students, but before we rolled this out publicly, typically our process is to go to staff, administrators, get feedback. We did have a session with the high school. With Lowell High School. I know that we have a couple of high schools. And Mr. Osoro, did you want to share anything from the high school session?
No, yeah, so it was a pretty inclusive and robust process where school administration and staff teachers were part of this process from the beginning. They actually launched the first listening session, and we just piggybacked off them on a district level.
Should have added that.
Yeah, next time I will, thank
That
you.
would have been important.
And they also gave us some recommendations that improved on this. So at first, we were just talking about racism, and they did share that it would be more inclusive, more broad if we added discrimination and harassment, and also acknowledge that there were intersections, of racism, of sexism, of many isms, and we wanted to make sure that the process could help us understand the complexity of discrimination. And so those were some changes that we made after hearing from administrators, about this process.
I have one other statement, basically, is on the page with required procedural components page, the whole reporting of discrimination and so forth. I think that's been in place in Lowell Public Schools since I've been teaching, since I was teaching in Lowell. That's been in place, that we were, by law, we had to report any of these things. So that's not something new.
Right. So that is in the handbook, the requirement to report on discrimination and harassment. But many were bypassing racism and not seeing that as part of discrimination and harassment. So that's why we had to call it out specifically. And then it's also, we changed the reporting process. So right now, any incidents that are reported go into a spreadsheet that can be accessed centrally, that can be accessed by the school leader. So it's not just a personal resolution anymore. It's us understanding within a school building as well as across the district what all is occurring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say thank you very much for this very important work. And I would encourage any of my colleagues who did not have an opportunity to attend one of yesterday's session to access it. I believe they were all recorded. The sessions that I have participated in, the trainings thus far related to culturally responsive work and anti-racism work have been so valuable. I have learned a lot, and I feel that I knew a lot going into this. So I just strongly encourage you to take the time to look at that. I would like to make a motion to give us as a committee the opportunity to dive a bit deeper into this work by sending it down to the Family and Community Engagement Subcommittee, because I think that there is, this work is so important, and I think there's a lot of additional work that is happening within the district, the anti-racism training, some of the strategic initiatives, like the Portrait of a Graduate work. I think that we would benefit greatly by having our subcommittee meet. Committee member Ms. Doherty, she actually spoke about perhaps utilizing our citywide family council, and perhaps there would be opportunity to utilize them in getting this messaging out. As Ms. Phillips identified, it is important that we send this message out within our community and to families, beyond just mentioning that it's up on the website. And Mr. Dillon did reference at one of our prior committee meetings about really utilizing our subcommittees in this way. So I think this is a real opportunity, especially where this was taken from surveying of students. And I know there's been some other work going on even to survey students and alumni for some other work that's going on. And I just think it's really important that we have an opportunity to dive in. So thank you.
Sure. Okay, motion by Ms. Clark, seconded by Ms. Doherty. Send it to, which subcommittee did you say again?
The Family and Community Engagement.
All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Okay. Ms. Doherty and then Mr. Dillon.
I just have one quick question. Is this work primarily for the high school, or do you see this happening through the whole district? Or are we just starting with the high school? What's the plan?
So it is for the entire district. It came out of sessions with the high school students, so that's why it's kind of a focal point to help us learn and grow, because the kids are older. But again, it will be for all grades, because it's not just students, it's also staff and families' experiences.
Thank you. Mr. Dillon?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I echo who, somebody had a comment earlier about consulting with administrators. And so I think, that is very valuable to people that are in charge of discipline, in our particular buildings. But also the teachers, because one thing that a concern I have had about, discipline in our schools is our teachers, almost their authority being taken away and being undercut in a way by, by our discipline policies, really. And so I would really be interested in making sure that our teachers and administrators were 100% on board with restorative justice practices, and also what kind of, I'm also interested in what kind of staff or what kind of extra staff hours and also educational hours for the kids will be required to go through the process during a restorative justice implementation of that. Because the way I look at discipline is I feel like all of these things should happen through the course of good traditional being a disciplinarian. Good disciplinarians take all of these things into account. They follow up. They make sure the incident is over. They make sure there's understanding. And hiring one good disciplinarian and having that person dedicated to discipline at that school can be extremely effective in that area. And I'm just wondering, are we taking away from the principal's ability to discipline? Are we, how does that, and how many faculty hours kind of go into it outside of just the principal? Because can anybody touch on that?
Sure, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you. Dr. Guillory, can you share a little bit about our approach to discipline, how restorative practices merge in with a traditional disciplinary practice and how it diverges from?
So good evening. So part of the ongoing work with restorative justice and the restorative practices in the system. Presently, the Butler as well as the Sullivan School are undertaking some work within a grant that we have to expand that work. The idea would be to use our Renaissance schools as sort of a growing community where that work can be expounded upon. And at that point, as we learn and grow those practices, then they could be replicated or shared in other spaces. Many of the techniques or founding principles that you see in restorative practices, you can typically walk around any elementary school and look at a morning meeting style structure and have a similar experience with what happens there. Also, many of our schools are undertaking open circle and second steps as part of their SEL curriculum. So all of these pieces, although they have different names, they serve different purposes, they still fall under that umbrella of supporting both staff and students in working more collaboratively with one another.
Okay, is there, I guess I'm just asking it, how much time is put in to this process as, compared to, I don't know, maybe the way that we've been disciplining in the past, staff-wise, and everyone else? What goes into, a conference or post-incident conference? Is there a time frame on that stuff? Can we keep up? That type of stuff.
Too is we can get these can get this information for the subcommittee too. We can really
Sure.
get into it, and we'll get that list of questions and make sure we get that answered.
All right, I just thought that was something that could be explained quickly, but.
Yeah, it is, but do you have a answer for that, Mr. Superintendent?
I would defer to staff here, Ms. Desmond. Ms. Desmond or Dr. Guillory, if it's a quick answer. If not.
So we actually have a grant for restorative justice, and we are working with Suffolk University. We are training teams of teachers at the high school, at the Sullivan, the Robinson, the Butler, the Stocklosa. Those teachers will then train other teachers in the building. So the commitment is to have a cadre of teachers at all of those buildings engage in professional development paid through this grant, and then they will train the trainers essentially in the buildings. The work happens right within the classroom, so hopefully it would be a situation where it's more empowering for our teachers to support the restorative justice practices and protocols within their classroom as it exists, not outside of the classroom.
I think I was hearing your question saying a little bit more of a time study. How much is the time required of staff implementing one strategy versus the other? Is that?
Yeah, and also is it taking away from education time, in class stuff, or?
So it's built into the classroom environment. So at the elementary level, it's part of morning meeting, which is a time where teachers and students work together to resolve differences and get to know each other and learn. Mm-hmm. And then at the middle school, it would be similar during advisory.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking that all sounds excellent. I'm thinking maybe the high school level. There are so many disciplinary issues on a daily basis that we can talk in subcommittee. Thank you.
Mr. Howie?
Yeah, I'll save most of mine for the subcommittee, but this was a great motion, and I think race relations is a great thing to be talking about all the time, as much as you can talk about it. Abraham, I only met you maybe once or twice. I think you're from the Boston area.
Yes, sir.
Do you speak another language?
Yes, Spanish.
Spanish? That's very good. I'm glad you do, because I look at the high school, I take it to heart. That place there, I didn't finish. I dropped out in my junior year because I was like a delinquent. I should have been put in a reform school. But I think someone like you could bring a lot to this high school. Our student body, to me, is second to none. It's a big school. I don't think you met them all yet.
I've been engaging.
All right, good for you, good for you. But a school that big needs to talk about this all the time. And I'm not sure what type of testing you're gonna do on a guy like me, because sometimes I'm like Archie Bunker, you know? I already had to apologize to Guillory, to be honest with you, Mr. Guillory. But we make mistakes in life. But I look at the Sullivan School, when that was just mentioned, and I'm not just picking on the Sullivan School, but it's been a problem of mine as a school committee person for a long time. I think we just hired someone that's going to do great things for that school. I think we hired you. I'm not sure if you met the superintendent in Dudley Square. Is that how you got the job, did you? Did you meet him in Dudley Square?
Superintendent, yes.
Yeah, good, because Andy and myself went down there on a visit to see him before we hired him. And,
I think we met that time. Yeah.
well, I'm a retired prison guard, and I sat there. I knew more people than I do in Lowell. It was unbelievable. But I know you're going to bring big things to Lowell. And speaking Spanish is definitely going to help you. I think that's where we're lacking a little bit. We can't, when we hire diversity, we're having a hard time to find qualified Hispanic people. That's what we need in the system. But thank you for what you do. I already know a little bit about you, and I'm impressed. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Much obliged.
Thank you. Thank you for the report.
Thank you. I would conclude it by saying, Mr. Hoey, you're absolutely right. Our students are second to none. We have the very best students in the Commonwealth, the very best students in the country, and Lowell Public Schools is going to be the highest performing school district in the Commonwealth, and our students are going to lead the way. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, committee.
Thank you.
Can I add to that comment that we have
Sure.
a top-notch staff of teachers, second to none?
That's right.
Just
That's right.
pointing that out.
Thank you.
Amendment accepted.
All right. Any questions on the enrollment report?
I would like to point out something there. I was asked a question by the committee at the last time that we shared the enrollment report. If you recall, I shared that at that point, because of the delays in school opening, the 15 days and the drop ads and the correlation of data, we couldn't yet give you specifics about the declining enrollment. We did expect that there would be declines. There's declines across the state. I'm gonna guess that Committee Member Doherty and her work with the Association of School Committees is going to be talking about this quite a bit. Here right now in Lowell, we're looking at approximately 2.5% decline. Not as large as what we've seen in some other districts. Some other districts are reporting upwards of 5%, but nonetheless, it is something that we have to keep an eye on. It is something that is to the point of significance. Now, that might not hold. It could grow. Remember, our enrollment data will be certified based on October 1, and then it's verified and validated in March. That then leads to our budget numbers going forward. So it's going to be something that's important to keep an eye on. It's not as large as what some school districts are reporting, but it is still nonetheless a significant number that we have to keep ourselves attuned to. So that's what we're looking at there. That was the note I wanted to make sure that we put forward today for committee's awareness. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I need a motion to accept the reports by Mr. Dillon, seconded by Mr. Hoey. All those in favor? Home education. Any questions on that? Motion to approve by Ms. Doherty, seconded by Mr. Hoey. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
That brings up the total to 114. Next, we have budget transfer. Any questions on the budget transfer? Motion to approve. Motion by Ms. Doherty, second by Mr. Hoey. Roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
9.2, approval to accept and expend allocated F-21 awards. Any questions on that? And Mr. Superintendent, anything on this?
No, just as a reminder, this is the procedural motion that has to come forward based on the auditor's request.
Any questions? Sure, Ms. Doherty? No. Motion to approve by Ms. Doherty, seconded by Ms. Martin. There's a good amount of projects in here, and a lot of money and some good hard work to get these awards, so roll call?
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
9.3, temporary amendment of snow day policy. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This seemed to be the guidance that I was provided by the school committee. If you recall, we had a little bit of a surprise snowstorm, so we felt it prudent to bring this to you by way of formal policy as soon as we had the guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So what's before you is authorization this year only to also consider a movement to remote learning during the course of a snow day as opposed to canceling school and having to make it up. Ms. Desmond's available if you have additional questions. She did this research and continued communication with the department. So thank you to Ms. Desmond. The recommendation's approval as written.
I had a quick question. So the section for principals, clerks, paraprofessionals. So what are we doing if it's bad weather? There's school day, the students have their work at home to do, right? And so what do we do for the people that are going into the building?
So we have different classifications of employees as to whether they come in for work during the course of a snow day or not. If they're not coming into work during the course of a snow day, they would still stay home and support the remote learning environment. We're shift to remote learning as opposed to canceling school. Otherwise, all of the same requirements apply. A little bit different based on job classification and work location as to what those rules are. Ms. Desmond can give you specifics if you want to know about a specific.
No, I just want to make sure I was looking at this, I just wanted to make sure, it didn't really jump out at me, but they just follow. Okay, so basically this year we shouldn't have any snow delays to add on to the end of the school year.
The only exception might be if there's a mass power outage across the city, if we have some type of severe blizzard or so on where remote learning is not a possibility.
Yeah.
That might be the only exception that we might have to look at, which is why we're amending it to include this as an option rather than putting it as an absolute.
Okay. So I need a motion to approve temporary amendment, snow day policy by Mr. Dillon, seconded by Ms. Clark. We need a roll call, Mary.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
Okay. 9.4, discussion, selection of the MASC proposed resolutions. Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Your Honor. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if you had any concerns about these resolutions. I was planning on voting yes for all of them. I do have some reservations about the first one, because not only do they want to put a moratorium on MCAS for this year, the 2021 school year, but for the next 3 years. And, you know, I know there's a lot of people that feel like high-stakes testing, we put a lot of effort into teaching to the test and all that, but I am someone that likes the idea of an outside measure, but I think that we shouldn't hold kids accountable for last year because we got out of school in March. This year, obviously, is a total anomaly. 3 years down the road, I don't know. So I would defer to your judgment if everybody on the committee is comfortable with me voting yes for all 10 resolutions. If you have any concerns about any of the resolutions that you don't want me to support, speak now. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.
Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to my colleague, I share your concerns. I mean, it seems to me that a more rational or reasonable response would be that we'd still have the option of the testing, but take away the high-stakes aspect of it. I mean, not getting the information at all, I think, puts us at a deficit. We spent a great deal of time, effort, and money implementing this program. Moving to the new format that had just was happening. So, I mean, it seems like a real potential to lose a great deal of ground. I mean, I absolutely agree. I don't think there should be a graduation requirement attached to it at this point. I don't think that there should be any kind of school or district or classroom punishment or, kind of, aspect of it. But I do think that the information is valid, and if nothing else, can show us what the impact of a pandemic can really be on the quality of education, and ultimately, we hope, show us the way forward as to where we need to focus our efforts as we're trying to remediate the losses that we've had. So that's my only, and I understand the thought process behind saying, let's just eliminate it, but it does seem like we're missing an opportunity if we do that.
So I'm thinking that maybe during the discussion at Saturday's meeting, this could be brought up as an option, because DESE has done that in the past. We were held harmless as a district when we switched over, right? So to say, we still do the test, it's not a graduation requirement for the kids who went through last year and didn't take it, the kids this year, and even going into the future for the next couple of years. We don't hold it as a graduation requirement. We don't hold the districts penalizing districts. You're going to be going to be level 4 and all that kind of stuff. But that we do get the information, because as we know, there are going to be gaps because of this remote learning, because of the pandemic, and it helps us to identify what those gaps are. So I'm still leaning heavily towards a no, but trying to get it not as a high school requirement, as opposed to just thrown away with it.
Do you want Mr. Dakota and then Mr. Dillon?
Well, I think, with the fact that all of our children have had these gaps in their education, to force them to take a test that had such high implications of consequences, I think it's really, if we can only use it for a metric to use, yes, and not be part of the graduation, absolutely, absolutely. And I agree with at least 3 to 4 years, because it's going to take that long to refill those gaps.
Thank you. Mr. Dillon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with my colleagues. I think probably the biggest issue with MCAS is that it's tied to, it's tied to money, it's tied to kid graduating, and that type of stakes. Those type of stakes make, the biggest thing that I have wrong with MCAS in general. So I think that is an excellent step. And was there any talk on why the 3 to 4 year? No. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that information.
That's why
was
we're
already-
discussing it tonight. The meeting is Saturday.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had met already prior.
So I
Okay.
can find out that information. I just wanted to know that we were all on the same page.
Yeah, I
about- and
agree.
it sounds like we are, that if we can make it not a high school graduation, we're all comfortable with continuing with the MCAS, but nobody feels comfortable with holding kids accountable to graduate on MCAS scores in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm certainly not against standardized testing. It's important to track our kids, but I think the elimination of the graduation component is a good measure. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Doherty?
Sorry, just one more thing, since we're talking about the Mass Association of School Committees. You guys should all get this bulletin, right? Well, I just wanted to point out, they're doing these lunch and learn Zoom meetings, and this Friday at 12 o'clock is one on the school committee superintendent relationship. And I think that we can all benefit from that. I certainly can learn and do a better job in my seat. And so I just wanted to invite, it's free, we're all members of Mass Association of School Committees. They just ask that you register in advance so they know how many people are going to be on. But that would be this Friday if you're interested.
Who provides the lunch?
You have to, it's Zoom. It's Zoom. So the idea is they do it at 12 in the afternoon. So if you're working, you get to take your lunch hour. I don't know if you'll actually be eating on the Zoom meeting, but.
Mr. Hoey, did you have a question?
No, just a statement. I've never been a big fan of MASC, to be honest with you, until Mr. Kuchu, I believe his name was, found Dr. Boyd for Lowell. So I'm a fan of them now. But I like having Jackie Doherty represent us down there in the meetings, because I don't feel like we have a lot of representation on that board. We used to have Evelyn Thorin from Chelmsford, and she retired. I think she's in the Hall of Fame of school committee people. But I'm with you, Jack. I believe that's what, I'm with you on all 10, just so you know.
Sure, Ms. Clark.
You might make it, buddy. I'm telling you, if you keep going the way you are, you might make it. But Mayor, I know I'm out of line here, but I just want to tell all my,
Hold on one side.
Yeah.
You do?
I just wanted to say
All right,
that I
Ms.
want.
Clark, and then I'll go
Yeah,
to you.
to strongly support Resolution 4, which is lowering the voting age for municipal elections. I think that that ties really nicely to a strong civic engagement of our youngsters, and especially in Lowell, where we have, I think, a strong, an educational component that is even being modeled after, I think, in our middle school level, and now at the high school, the teacher, I'm blanking on the teacher's name, but he was at the Pine and has just moved over to the high school. Anyways, a civics engagement, what is it? Nagel, thank you. Yes, Mr. Nagel, who has really done such great work in this space. And I know there are other teachers that are doing this work, but I think that this is so important, and at the end, if this really does pass, it looks like it's something that this would be a local issue that would be brought here to Lowell to make a decision on whether we would allow students or people who are 16 and 17 years old to vote in our municipal elections. And I just think that this ties very nicely to the work that's going on, creating strong civic engagement in our youngsters, which will prove to be, hopefully turn them into lifelong engaged community members. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howie?
no, I'm good, Mayor, thank you, I'm good on that. But before we adjourn, I want to say something, okay, if you could?
Okay.
Mayor, thanks.
All right. Any other questions on this? So what's the motion that you're looking for to,
I don't think I need a motion. You've already designated me to be your delegate.
Okay.
We discussed that we wanted to have an opportunity to talk about the 10 resolutions
Yeah.
before I actually voted on them, and I think I've got a very good sense
there's
of
no
where we
motion?
stand.
Yeah, there's no
So I'm good.
need for a
Thank
motion.
you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Howie, before we,
Yeah, thank you. I'm just lucky enough to live behind a school. I live behind the Pine School. I just want to say this to maybe make Mr. Dillon feel pretty good, because I know how hard he's working to try to get as many children in school as possible. But the CSA classes, I watched them in the field the ball field behind the Pine School today, and it just makes you feel good to see them there. We only have 3%, in our schools right now. Is that the number? Yeah, it's just nice to see. I know it's just the Pine School, but thank you. It's just something great that you should all see. If you have nothing to do, come over and make you a cup of coffee. You could see the teachers doing a great job with them in the Stratham Field. So we do have something going good. I hope we can get more like that going. Thank you,
I'll be
Mayor.
over Friday, I'll have lunch
All right.
and coffee.
Bring some donuts.
Motion to adjourn.
Bring some
Do you have a
donuts.
question or a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn by Mr. Dillon, second by Mr. Howie. Thank you.
Yep.